Today, the mentoring triangle is joined by Richard Hill, the former British and Irish Lions rugby player and legend of England's World Cup 2003 victory. Richard, it's great to have you with us. Really wanted to have the opportunity to pick your brains about your journey through sport and what you feel has been really significant in terms of your development, both as a rugby player, but also helping you to become the successful human being you are off the pitch.
Nice broad remit there. Do you want me to start on that? I think a lot of my development started without me even knowing it. And my brother was older than myself, and my dad played sport. So quite often when I was younger, I'd get taken up to watch my brother play on a Sunday morning. But as I got that older, I started very young, 5 years old. But it was the subsequent years where, from my house about a mile away, if I could see the floodlights on midweek, you'd go up to the rugby pitch, and I might watch 5 minutes of rugby. But then on the hockey pitch over the bank that had just the smidging of light, myself and a group of 4 or 5 mates would have a ball, we'd pass it around, we'd kick it around, we'd make up our own games. And I think that went a long way to understanding the bounce of a ball. It just improved skill level because we were always challenging each other. I went to a secondary school that was known for its rugby, and the other players that came out of my school were the other Richard Hill, Dave Edgerton went on to be capped as well. So it was the same sports master who had a pedigree of bringing players through and looking at some of the more basic skills of just drawing and passing, creating space for others, and we had a good fixture list and enjoyed it. But it was learning. I was constantly learning, and going back to the formative years as well. I went to a small primary school, 64 kids in it, girls and boys. I think there were four boys in my year group. So if the team put out a football team, a rounders team, any team, your odds of getting selected were pretty high. But what it was doing was constantly making you play different sports. And even when I went to secondary school, you play basketball. I'd do gymnastics, but I'd absolutely hate it. If ever I was going to put a doctor's note in, it would be for gymnastics. A dangerous sport, dangerous. But the football team, I just enjoy playing sport. But I suppose in terms of international recognition, it just wasn't on my thought process until a good friend of mine, Marcus Olsen, got involved with England under-16s, who was a year older than me, and he just came back and said, I think you'll play for England next year. And it hadn't even crossed my agenda or anything, but I suppose that it did happen. And I sat on the bench for England under-16s, Italy away. But again, it was one of those life experiences. You got a taste of it. I had the ultimate disappointment at the end of the day of being one of 2 players that didn't get capped that day out of 23. And whilst it's a career highlight of your time, you're left there with this disappointment of, well, look how happy everyone else is. So, you fight, you train that little bit harder, you look at things a bit different, and I suppose from there I was fortunate enough to play for every England team I possibly could. With varying degrees of success. But we were discussing earlier, it was the disappointment of 16s, but probably the biggest setback that became one of the biggest positives was being selected for England A Tour, which was now England Saxons, the England second team to Australia. First team were down at the World Cup in 1995, and I'd been the understudy to Neil Back in that team during the Six Nations A League, and he went off to the World Cup, so I suppose there was this natural assumption, you must be going as number 1. We went with 3 open sides in total, which meant there was a limitation on how many times you could play at 7. You had to play out of position a little bit, and it just didn't go right. I didn't get selected for either of the 2 tests, one against Australia and one against Fiji, and generally came back disappointed, but even more disappointed to hear a tour report that said I didn't have the mental capacity to play for England. So that can be quite damning when your ambition is to play for England and you believe you're so close. So that coincided as well. I'd had to defer my finals for my degree, so I came back, finished those off, and I suppose that's when there had to be a reassessment. It looked like it was going to go professional at some point with rugby. I reflected on the tour, whilst maybe not agreeing on why or I wasn't selected and reasons for. I also took responsibility for elements of my own actions on the tour. Some of the more psychological type things, the easily persuaded to disappear off into town rather than knuckling down and sleeping or recovery. I also recognised that fitness wise, physically I wasn't where I should be, and I took the opportunity while working part-time, waiting for it to turn professional, to really knuckle down on all those aspects and use that disappointment to change things around. And 18 months later, playing for England. 2 years later, the 2 years from being told didn't have the mental capacity to play for my country, I was playing for the Lions.
Wow.
So the journey I suppose went really quickly from what was a huge disappointment to reaching what for many people would be the ultimate accolade for an individual player.
And the drive after that, because you've made it, because you a lot of willpower and effort to go from not having the mental capacity to playing for the Lions, but you didn't stand. There was another target.
Yeah.
How did you sustain it?
Well, I suppose when you first get picked for England, you're looking for that first cap. You're looking for 2 caps. You're then saying, well, if I get to 10 caps, people will start saying, well, they might remember who you were if you were to drop off the face of rugby. But it also coincided with a phenomenal group of players. Good leadership under Sir Clive Woodward. Who were highly driven. And as we were building up, and I suppose it very much culminated with winning the World Cup in 2003. And some of the bits that really stick in your mind were the training camp building up to the World Cup in 2003 of just bloody minded people, individuals who weren't prepared to let you just win a 3K time trial, or weren't prepared to let you be the best bench presser, or that existed. From the moment we were all in the squad, it got heightened and heightened and heightened, and you're doing all these tests, and as back row, myself, Lawrence, Neil Back, Martin Corrie, Lewis Moody, Joe Worsley, we were in direct competition. There were 3 slots for us, but if you weren't on top of your game, someone was going to walk in and take your place. It didn't really matter whether people said, well, there's only 3 people to pick. In our eyes, there weren't. And that's the most important 3 in terms of your own motivation. So, you had to do these anaerobic shuttle tests. And I knew I wanted to be the best at them, but you couldn't always be the best at everything. So you almost wanted to take the plaudits when you were classified as the best out of the 6. And when you fell out of that top 1, top 3, congratulating the people who you were vying against, knowing full well, got a little bit of work to do there myself, haven't I? But I'll take it on the chin. There were other moments throughout it, and even in 2001, building up to Lions Series in Australia, it'd been made very clear to me that there are some outstanding individuals who are available for selection in the back row. The English guys that I've already mentioned. You start adding Scott Quinnell, Martin Williams, Simon Taylor, and others to that list, then what is your point of difference to get yourself selected for a test team when the quality is that much? And out of the group, there weren't many back row forwards who were prepared to jump in the line out. And my season with my club finished a month early than the tour left, and there was some other Saracens players who were in the same boat as me when they were going for England tour to Argentina. So the likes of Danny Grucott, Dave Flatman, Julian White. I used that opportunity we did our own training, but utilise our own skill development so that they would help me with my practicing to line out jump, and I would help them in other ways, whatever they wanted. So that skill development had to start pretty quick, and I did that 4 years after I'd 5 seasons into being capped, and it would have been very easy just to say, well, no, that's the player out and you select me or not, but you have to develop, you have to move on if you want to. I suppose. I mean, I wasn't looking for worldwide accolades or being. I just wanted to be the best I could, and if that meant having to learn or develop a new skill, then you have to do it, and as well as making sure you brush up on the ones you're supposedly good at in the first place.
Yeah. Just a question. Clearly, a lot of your success is down to your own endeavour. Fundamentally, it's about you and you making decisions for yourself. But you mentioned one person right at the beginning, whose name I've forgotten, that mate who comes back and at 16 and said that you could be playing for England. You said, could I? Yeah. And that person was a pivotal point, I think was the phrase used. Who else? And I'm not after so much the names here, or you can mention the names, but what were there other people, and what was it about those people, the way who they were or the way they worked with you, which meant that you listened to them, wow, perhaps did something a bit different, and they had that influence?
I think the first bit to clarify is, I suppose I definitely have put it in a way that it was me who did this development, and I suppose with any leadership, I do believe you start with yourself. If you can't motivate yourself, then you're going to have a few problems being involved in a successful team. So I suppose the motivation was that that's what I wanted. The reason it escalated into improving at a rate, or the ability it did, was because of the individuals I was able to utilise who were involved with either Saracens or England at that particular time, where it became a lot more skill specific and a lot more sports science related in terms of fitness. So definitely within the club structure and the England structure, I have to hold up my hand and say it wasn't all me, it was the people who were there. If I look back, there's no doubt in the, even when I looked at Salisbury Rugby Club, which is where I started, a lot of it came down to people we were involved in, even my under-8s coach, Mr. Moffat. You knew... You
remember his name?
Yeah, well, it was all about enjoyment. And whilst I look back and I think, wow, the individuals within that team, even though it was a small junior mini rugby team, there's a lot of players that went on to do various bits and pieces within junior rugby setups, whether it was county or South and Southwest, and the friend who played England 16s, he played England emerging players, Marcus Olsen. I had a good friend, Pete Correndon, who was England under 16s trialist, and we were, so when you start looking at that quality, you actually realise, well, it wasn't just practice we were doing, because there were so many quality people against. It was the quality of practice we were doing. So, I certainly remember doing a demo. I'm not sure whether it was under 10s, under 11s, under 12s, or something like that, in front of the whole of my peer group with a guy called Dave Coveney, and it was tackle practice. And Dave was a decent sized player, decent player, and it was, Dave, can you run at Richard? And Richard also had to tackle. Oh my lord, he ran at me. I got him down. I did a tackle, good tackle, but I got up going, oh jeez, that was tough. But that was the level we were dealing at. It wasn't just a case of someone pondered in and fell over. I had to make a proper tackle. So there was the enjoyment angle. I spoke about secondary school. Steve Ralph Bowen, who was head of sport, very much led a tight ship. Ex-Marine, so it was very much systems in place. The 8, 9, 10 axis was massive in terms of our attacking play, and I was playing 8, and obviously the friend who played England 16s, Marcus, was at 9, and that's when you look at Dave Edgerton and Richard Hill, both went on to play for England, but they were the 8, 9 axis in their year group. So if you got it right, had the right people around, and on the wings we had one England 100 metre to schoolboy runner, we had one 110 metre hurdler, so we had some pace around as well. So, and we got a good school system as well.
What that also shows me is just the power of peer learning. People not just teaching themselves about themselves, but actually teaching each other. And that kind of benchmarking that you spoke about with your World Cup squad means that, from a leadership perspective, the work is being done for you within the group. And one of the things that I find really probably challenging and problematical about modern sport is, I feel that the players are almost being emasculated in that there aren't leaders within the group. There's like a leadership team of the coaching and support staff, and there's a captain. But I get a strong sense from you that that particular group that you were part of, even guys who didn't make the starting 15 were still leaders in your group based on their commitment to high performance and trying to get the best out of themselves. So I think that for me is a really fascinating part of your story, is the role that other people have played around you. And obviously there's a lot of data about the World Cup success. And it's one of the great achievements, I think, in terms of British sport, because of when Sir Clive Woodward took over that team, and the journey it went on was incredible. But the thing that most fascinates me about your story is how you've now gone on and shared the value of your experiences with other people. And some top sports people almost become entertainers with the stories about their days. And I really admire how you've been able to synthesise your own experiences, but not just go and share it with other people in a way where this is what I did, but just stand alongside people and be just underneath them to support them should they fall back, and so you can help them push forward again. So I'm really curious to learn a bit more about how you see how you've evolved beyond that World Cup success.
When you retire and you start to try and work with, it doesn't matter what age group they are, it could be with first team regulars, guys who've got international experience themselves, or the young 15-year-old, you're there and you're trying to improve their skills. You may have viewed them on a video, or you may have watched them live, and you know that there are areas of the game that they can benefit from working on. And it might be the breakdown. And people may comment about, you always made the right decision at the breakdown. It's a very hard thing to impart what your thought process was, because a lot of that was inherently built around practice, performance in matches, learning from mistakes, seeing how you did it correctly. They were all built on, a lot of it was built under pressure. And you may not have that same element of pressure put on you ever again. Or it may be 6 months later and you're challenged again with that same scenario in a match. But it's about making those instantly correct decisions on a pitch. So you're trying to impart the bits that you can, but to try and break it down individual is sometimes difficult. So that was one of the bigger challenges. But I also recognise that what worked for me doesn't work for everyone, and I knew that when I was playing. I knew that I was quite a serious player, and it worked for me to be very methodical, write things down. I must do this. I must do this sort of training. If I miss this training session, it could have an impact. I'm not going out tonight because it could impact on 2 weeks' time. That was in my psyche. But then I fully aware that there were players that I played with who that didn't fit. That didn't fit into their psyche. It didn't help their performance. They very much wanted to enjoy life. That's not to say they weren't serious about the training they did, the level of training they put in. I just knew that when if I went out, I didn't necessarily train at top whack the next day. There were some people who could do it in the generation I grew up with. But that's fine. So I soon accepted that you can't expect others to perform and train like you did or do what you did, because it won't work. You can break them mentally as well as physically. So.
And Richard, I know, like us, you're passionate about young player development, and you do it. What's the one thing that you'd like to see more of in the way young players are developed now in the professional area? Both, not just in rugby, but generally.
Well, I think since it all went professional, things have changed. Right. Certainly within the first Saracens team that I would have played in, I look at some of the personnel that would be in there: plasterer, lawyer, actuary, teacher. There was a fine arrayment of people. So the leadership qualities were learned in different fields, so you got different experiences. It wasn't 15, 30 people all being taught leadership in the same way. They were learning on the job. And then they would try and relate it back to rugby, whereas we tend to learn it within rugby and then try and relate it out. So definitely leadership is a huge commodity, I believe, within the professional game. And even now, you know, we're seeing teams that are developing leaders, but it's on the run. There aren't, you know, there aren't the 7 players that we stepped onto the field in Sydney with who'd already captained their country and captained it well when they were required, as well as having other captains who were on the bench to call upon. So leadership is massively important. I think as we move on as well, it's young players want things to happen. They want them to happen straight away. To get your first England cap at the age of 23 was deemed as, that's quite young. Whereas now, it's not unfeasible for the likes of Johnny Wilson to come along. He was one of the early ones at 18. It's not uncommon now for these guys to be getting capped at 20. But once they've seen their peers getting capped at 20, everyone thinks that they can get into a first team at club level. The patience is that little shorter, and it's getting a relationship with a player for him to understand exactly where he's at, but without denting his confidence, his enthusiasm. And also sometimes because they're not selected in a team, there can be an element they want to question the coach every week. Why haven't I been picked? Which is fine for a week or two, and maybe a bit longer. A coach loves that. Oh, this is exciting. We've got a player. He's dead keen to be playing. Unfortunately, once the coach has been a month or 2 months into the season, he's getting bogged down with analysis of performance, preparation for upcoming matches, coping with a few injuries. He's now starting to get a bit weary about the player, and I've certainly found that how you talk to young players about the language they use, the questions they use, and also sometimes to get them to re-engage with that coach because they're disappointed with not being selected, and just get them to talk to a coach about something that's not even rugby. Go and sit down at lunchtime, have a little chat, ask him how his family are. That'll catch him unawares. But that coach will then go away and say, oh, that was quite pleasant. I'm re-engaged with them. It probably wouldn't happen on one occasion, but you can see that the influence can build with time. I think we also expect 18-year-olds at times to come in and be the finished article. When physically they do still have to develop, mentally they definitely have to develop. Unfortunately in that age bracket things do happen. They're still trying to work out themselves, they're still trying to work out where their boundaries lie on certain things, and they get it wrong at times. And it's about putting processes in place, or being in a society or culture where the boundaries are known, and we don't want you to go outside, but how are we going to piece it together if you should step outside the boundaries whilst not wanting to condemn anything that's happened? How are we going to support you to get you back on track and get you focused and right again?
And for me, that's one of the really powerful things about the role you played at Saracens. And I know you play with other sports people in the work you've done with us at London County, is that you're able to reflect in a very meaningful way with people. You come with great credibility, but you have a lovely way of building trust through very informal conversation, and also creating activities such as your fishing trips, where the informality is there, and slowly but surely the relationship starts to develop, which means that you're more likely to be able to hit the target when there is a key message to deliver. But I think the most important thing is that young people are allowed to make mistakes, and that even if their skill level is high because they've been at it for a long time, the reality is because they've been living in quite a protected world in sport, they haven't maybe explored other parts of themselves. But to have someone such as yourself who's been through the mill, as it were, and isn't going to talk to them in the way maybe a coach or a teacher does, I think is a really invaluable experience, and I hope you can continue to share your wisdom and particularly the modelling that you show of being a very humble individual who quite rightly has earned world-class status, but never wears that in the way that some elite sports people do. I love the way that you've got this understated approach, and you really are there for people. I think that's a very special quality. So, well, may that continue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.